The Backrooms. This pasta was inspired by a post from the X-board on 4chan. It was approximately 12:15 when I entered the Johnson County Community Health Clinic. I was there for an appointment I had set up a week ago, just a routine checkup. It wasn't a new place for me. I'd been there a couple of times. However, the place had an odd, nostalgic feel to it, as if it were a location from my childhood, or something that I could never pinpoint exactly what this feeling was, or where it came from. As I walked in, an overwhelming feeling of deja vu swept over me. The hum of the flickering fluorescent lights, the white tile flooring, the muted beige paint that colored the walls. I noticed that there was a TV mounted in the corner, a small flat screen that was playing a short PowerPoint slideshow of loops of ads and events that were being held by the clinic. I passed the empty waiting area, a small area of the main room with magazines, children's playthings, and blue cushioned chairs, and approached the woman at the front desk. She was sitting in her bluish-gray office chair, looking at a spreadsheet on the same Windows XP desktop that they've had since 2008. There was a sign-up sheet in the counter in front of me. "I have an appointment with Dr. Pevins," I asked. "What time?" 12:30, I replied. She began typing something into her keyboard. "Ah, yes," she responded. "Gary Johnston?" "Mm-hmm." "Yes, I'll tell the doctor. Please fill this out." She handed me a clipboard which held a simple fill-out form. I walked back to the waiting area, took a seat, and began to fill out the form. I was about halfway done filling in the information when I slumped back into my chair. I hadn't gotten much sleep the night prior, and I was exhausted. As I slumped back, I noticed something very peculiar. My head never hit the wall. In fact, it felt like it went in. I got up, quite frightened, and looked at the wall. Nothing. Not a single hole or dent had been made in the wall by my head. So, I reached out to touch the wall, and my fingers went through it. I recoiled in shock. What the heck is that? I thought, as I reached to touch the wall again, only to find my fingers clipped through once more. Then, suddenly, I lost my balance, tripped, and fell directly through the wall. I fell face first onto some dirty tan carpeting. Upon getting back up, I realized that I was completely in a different room. Well, not a room per se. More so a set of rooms, all of which were connected by openings. The walls were covered in gross tan patterned wallpaper. There was also an overwhelming stench of moist carpet. I turned back around and tried to put my hand back through the wall, but it wouldn't go through. "Okay, what the freak?" I muttered. I looked back into the room. There were no windows, no doors, nothing on the walls, other than the disgusting wallpaper, of course. It was completely empty, aside from a singular plastic blue school chair. At this point, the only thing going through my mind was fear, and the repeating thought of, "I need to leave," on loop in my head. I started running through the rooms, desperately trying to find an exit, but to no avail. There was no exit. Was this my permanent location until I died? No, there had to be a way out. I wasn't going to just be left in here, right? Eventually someone would notice that I'm gone. But nobody did. Then in the distance I heard footsteps, but not those of a human's, at least not a normal human. Alongside the footsteps was a gurgling snarl, like that of an angry animal. I began to run. I ran as fast as I could from whatever the heck that was approaching me. I didn't want anything to do with it. I ran for what felt like forever, but I was always back in the same room I started in. At least it looked like the same room. Not that I could tell them apart. So, I sat down, defeated. A feeling of dread filled my body as I started to cry. I was going to die here. I'm still there. I haven't left. I've accepted my fate. In fact, I can actually hear footsteps. I wonder, who is that?
This happened when I was in elementary school. I think that I was in year 6, roughly 11 years old. My parents were called away urgently because one of my aunties or uncles were in need of some urgent childcare. They didn't go into the full details of why they had to go away, but I knew it was something serious. I remember it was a Saturday and my parents planned to leave at dusk. I was asked to keep an eye on my cousins since I was the eldest. I had a choice to go with my parents, and I wish I did, but it seemed way more fun to stay at home with my cousins. The cousins in question were a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. They were siblings. They kept nagging me to go and play with them. I couldn't take it anymore, and I buckled to the persistent requests from my little cousins. The younger sibling demanded a game of hide and seek. I didn't mind that. I wasn't too cool for a game of hide and seek. I thought that if I let them go and hide, I would have a couple of seconds peace while I counted down before I had to go and find them. I counted down from 50 and then I went to find them. My male cousin, the older sibling, hid in a nearby wardrobe, so he was easy to find. His sister, however, proved incredibly difficult to find. I couldn't really be bothered to search every place in the house, so I thought if I called out to her, I would be able to find her. I walked around the house, asking aloud, "Are you ready?" And because she was little and didn't really understand the premise of the game, she would enthusiastically answer, "Yes, I am." It sounded like she was hiding under the bed. I bent down as silently as I could and looked under the bed, but there was no one there. Strange. I called out again, "Are you ready?" And then I heard suppressed laughter coming from a wardrobe, a different one to the one I had found my cousin in. I threw open the door with a smile, and then frowned when I found it empty. At this point, her brother joined the hunt. She was a good hider, I'll give her that. We couldn't find her. After a few more minutes of searching, I started to feel uneasy. I got a little scared for her, so I called out to her one more time. "I surrender, you win, you're the champion, can you come out now?" I heard the bathroom door creak, and then I saw her smiling, victorious face. I just looked in the bathroom. It was pretty strange. I asked her outright, where was she hiding, after she stopped celebrating her victory over me. She replied, "That's the secret." We decided to play a board game after that. All the while, I couldn't get my mind off of what had just happened. It was stuck in my head, like, where the hell was she hiding? Later that night, my cousin's father came to pick up his children. Since the hour had grown late, I decided to take myself to bed. Looking back on it, why didn't I just go to their house? I'll still never understand that. While in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about that game of hide and seek. I think I must have dozed off. I heard a voice. You know, that dreamlike state right before you plunge into a deep sleep. You're hovering on the edge of consciousness. I was in that moment, and then I heard something. A voice from within my dark bedroom. "Are you ready?" I jolted awake, like that feeling you have when you're in that dreamlike state, where you feel yourself falling, and then you're suddenly awake. I heard it again. "Are you ready?" It was very, very faint, but I heard it. It was there. That voice didn't belong to either of my cousins, and it wasn't a young voice. I covered myself from head to toe in my duvet and blankets. That voice sounded old. It sounded adult and female. I heard it again. It sounded like it was getting closer. My body started involuntarily shaking. Panic gripped me. My heart was thumping. "Are you ready?" I couldn't reply like my cousin did. I couldn't just say, "Yes, I am." I didn't know what that would entail. I didn't know what would happen if I did that. I felt so scared and stressed, and I was still young, so the only logical answer that came to the forefront of my mind was, "No, I'm not ready." I heard that old woman voice whisper somewhere close to my bed in a voice as raspy as a mosquito. "Are you ready?" I felt as if I was about to be found in a game of hide and seek I didn't even enter into. This was the moment. The duvet and blankets were vigorously thrown upwards from my head. I screwed my eyes as tightly shut as I could. I let out the loudest scream I had ever heard. I fearfully opened my eyes after a few seconds and saw nothing but my dark and empty bedroom. I have no idea what the hell that was. I stayed up until my parents got home, absolutely petrified. When I was little, my family went on vacation every year. One of our relatives had a villa, and we used to travel across the country every summer and spend time there. It was great. I made lots of great memories with my family there, but I want to share a disturbing experience I had one night. I was about 10 or 11 when this happened. The villa was pretty deep in the mountains. There was no electricity, and there weren't too many other people in the area. It was a great place to spend a relaxing summer. On the 4th day of our annual stay, my parents decided that they wanted to go to karaoke. I didn't want to because I was so tired from hiking in the mountains. They said that I could get food there, and that won me over. The karaoke place was literally in the middle of a field halfway down the mountain pass. I guessed that we were there for about 2 hours or so. I looked at the clock, and it said it was 11 p.m. I was really wrestling with my own drowsiness now. The karaoke room was really loud. We had our own private room, so it was just my family in there. My dad saw how tired I was, and I guess he was kind of annoyed at my complaining. He said, "Why didn't you go sleep in the car?" I thought that wouldn't be a bad idea, so he gave me the keys and I headed back to the car park alone. It was really dark out there, and I remember the sound of crickets chirping in the distance. I got in the car, and all of a sudden, I didn't feel sleepy anymore. I felt strangely awake. Since I was no longer drowsy, I got bored pretty quickly, so I picked up the flashlight we had in the car. I was absent-mindedly shining it all around, and I aimed it at this other car which was parked in the car park. It was right next to our family car. I don't know how I didn't notice it before. I flicked the flashlight over the windows and I noticed a figure in the car. I thought that it would be rude to shine the light in that person's eyes, so I moved the flashlight off the car and then I just turned it off. I thought that had annoyed them, so I did what any kid would do to try and avoid trouble. In my situation, I pretended to be asleep. Through half-closed eyes, I noticed that the person in the car was looking my way. I couldn't make out their face, but I knew they were looking at me. It made me nervous. Something was off. I realized that the person in the car next to ours hadn't moved for a while. It was like a mannequin was sat in the car. I was sure that it was a person. Well, it looked like a human in the car. It didn't seem like my eyes were playing tricks on me. I felt a chill on my back. I really didn't like it in the car anymore. I made the decision to leave. Until the moment I felt like I needed to get out of there, the person in the car hadn't moved a muscle, but as soon as I decided to go, the figure slowly began to turn to face me more directly. Just the person's head, not their body. I was unable to move. It was like I was glued to the spot. Since I had been sat in the car for a while, my eyes had grown accustomed to the dark. I could now begin to make out the contours of the person in the car beside me. The head turned very slowly. The tension was unbearable, as I still couldn't move. When the head turned about halfway towards me, I felt my spine stiffen like ice. The face of that person in the car was in a keloid state. The face was ruined, with red raw scars so enlarged that they engulfed the features of the face. I couldn't make out the eyes or the nose. I focused every ounce of my energy into running, but I still couldn't move. Sweat was teeming down my forehead. Tears began to well in the corner of my eyes, yet I could not free myself. Now that I'm older, the only thing that I can describe that feeling as is sleep paralysis. Yet I was wide awake. At one point, I was convinced I was dreaming. I kept repeating in my mind, "Wake up, wake up!" But I couldn't. I couldn't wake up because I wasn't asleep, and this was really happening. I managed to close my eyes, and I kept them as tightly shut as I could. I don't know how long passed, maybe 4 or 5 minutes, and then I opened my eyes. I saw that scarred face staring right at me. I have no memory of that night, save for that reddened face peering at me. I was shaken awake by my dad. I told him what happened, and he suspected that I just had had a nightmare. He didn't seem all that interested. I was convinced that it was real, though. I didn't let it go. I made a bit of a scene in the car park. It was very traumatizing for me. I must have been in a state because my mother went back to the karaoke place to ask if there was anyone in the car park earlier. A few moments later, the owner of the place came out with my mother. She looked concerned, and she knelt beside the car and asked me very cautiously, "What did the person look like?" I guess that the owner of the place wanted to make sure that there was no troublemakers in the area. I felt the pressure as the adults awaited my answer. I said that there was a person in the car next to our car, and they were staring at me. The car had since gone, so we couldn't establish who the owner was. They asked me to describe the person, and I said that they had terrible red scars all over their face, and they were sat in the car next to ours. I was absorbed in giving as much detail as I possibly could. I barely noticed that the owner of the karaoke place was crying. She paused and cleared her throat and spoke in a weak voice. "I think you saw my daughter. She took her own life right in this car park. She set her car alight and sat in there 4 years ago." We were all in stunned silence. She felt comfortable speaking about what had happened. She went on to tell us that her daughter had been relentlessly bullied at school. It had gone on for years, and she had hid it from her family. To her, nothing could be done about the bullying, so she decided to take a different, fatal course of action. I was so sad to hear this. It was crushing. I've never felt such weight of oppressive loneliness. Something she said jogged my memory because I was suddenly able to remember something that happened before I fainted. I remembered that I heard a voice, and I will never forget it for as long as I live. I only heard 3 words. 3 words spat forth from the past to the present, and those words were, "I hate them." I hope her soul can find peace one day. I lived in an apartment which was built in 1989. Let me just go over the layout of the apartment because it's important. It's a pretty standard place, but it has a loft. It's not that big, to be honest. It's a little cramped in there. I don't really like my loft. I find it kind of, creepy. There's a certain sense of vulnerability that comes with having a loft. I can't quite explain it, but by the end of this story, you'll know why they frighten me. It all started with a feeling one night after work. I haven't been able to shift this feeling. As soon as I come through the door, the first thing I see as I enter my apartment is my loft. I get the feeling that sometimes something is watching me from up there. At first, I just thought that it was my tired mind conjuring up something. I've been tired before, you know. This felt different. Little did I know, a grudge was born that day. Let me give you a POV. When you're in the bed in the loft, if you naturally look out or down, you'd see the entryway leading to the kitchen. Now, naturally, when I sleep on my side, and therefore I face the entryway to the kitchen. Sometimes before sleep comes for me, I get the strong feeling that someone is looking up at me, staring at me from down there in the entryway. In uneasy times like that, I try to read or get myself to sleep as soon as possible. I hit the lights so I don't get distracted. I just use a little nightlight near my pillow to read my book. However, one night a deeper sense of unease crept over me. I felt as if something was wrong. I heard a noise coming from down below. The lights were off down there. I listened carefully. It sounded as if someone was exhaling. It definitely sounded like breathing. The second my mind understood that I was hearing breathing, I stayed deathly still. I was horrified. My heart began to thunder in my chest. I thought that there was an intruder in my home. The air in the room felt heavy and oppressive. It enveloped me. It was all around me. The room seemed to grow darker. I felt strange. I could still hear that noise. It resounded around the room below. It sounded closer. Beneath the loft there was a blind spot. I felt as if I pinpointed the spot where that breathing sound was coming from. Someone was down there, with their back against the wall. I managed to convince myself of that. When I imagined that, I shuddered. I drew my shoulders up to my chin and I held my covers tight. It was like a stalemate. I couldn't do anything, and the feeling that there was someone down there wouldn't go away. After a moment or two, the breathing sound suddenly stopped. I thought that it was all over, that I imagined the whole thing, and relief washed over me. Then, in that moment, I heard a familiar sound, a sound that I had heard many times before. It was the instantly recognizable sound of someone climbing the ladder which leads to the loft. It sounded exactly like someone climbing up towards me on that ladder. I was frozen with fear. Again, I was unable to move. My mind was a mess of fear and worry as I heard the sound of someone climbing up. Clarity came to me though swiftly. I guess this is what they call fight or flight. I made my mind up to deal with whoever was coming up. The sound continued. I was certain that I would see someone's head emerge in a matter of seconds. Those seconds came and went, although they felt as if they were hours. The tension was unbearable. Nothing came into view, and then the sound stopped. It stopped at the top of the ladder. If someone was on that ladder, I should have seen them. It sounded like whatever came up that ladder was now in the loft with me. I didn't know what the hell was going on. I was sure that there was an intruder in the house, and as soon as that thought crossed my mind, my nightlight went out, and I was plunged into absolute darkness. Then, close to my ear, I heard 3 words which chilled me to the core. Who are you? I cannot remember much after that point. I guess I fainted or something. It was morning when I opened my eyes again. I don't know why, but I don't really feel the need to pursue or search for the meaning or an explanation to this experience. I'm debating whether or not to move out. I feel like it could be just the beginning of something. There's definitely something bad in my apartment. I don't think I'll be able to stand it if something like that happens again.
This story was written by Entropic Society. Title name: Cemetery Security Guard. While I was in high school, I had a really awesome job working security at a cemetery that was just a couple miles away from my house. It was a great job while in high school since it slightly paid more than minimum wage. However, I would have to work the graveyard shift on the weekends. At first, I didn't mind the late shift since I never saw anyone after we closed, but also I got to stay in my truck and listen to the radio. But most importantly, at the time, I didn't believe in ghosts. This was great for me since I basically got paid hourly for doing nothing. However, my enthusiasm for my job slowly dissipated as a couple of events that I can't explain occurred, slowly turning me into a believer. The first thing that occurred that I thought was really strange was the odd mist that would only occur during the nighttime. This made shining my flashlight around the dark cemetery a lot more difficult. I wrote off the mist as just being cold weather during the night. A rather simple explanation. There were parts of the graveyard that I would avoid at night. Not that I was afraid or anything, but mainly because my radio didn't get great reception. I always get these blowing up 2 stations around this one tombstone, which I always thought was weird. It would be the only part of the graveyard that would do it. On the tombstone was the death date, June 6, 2006. 666. I'm not superstitious, but I always thought that was weird. The only thing that I noticed that I thought was weird were the lights. And when I say lights, I'm not referring to the lamppost inside the cemetery. I am referring to actual lights that float and hover around the cemetery. At first, I thought they were lightning bugs, but those typically get off a greenish-yellow glow for a few seconds. These lights that I would sometimes see were white. The lights moved around slowly and didn't last for very long. I wrote this off as a mixture between the mist that hovered over the graveyard and the passing cars that would sometimes pass by the cemetery through the night. These lights didn't scare me. They just made me uneasy. It was as if the alleged spirits of the graveyard were reminding me that I wasn't alone. The thing that did scare me were the shadow people. I remember seeing my first shadow person. I thought that someone had broken into the cemetery. At this point in my security career, I didn't believe in the paranormal. Because of that, the only reasonable explanation I can come up with is that someone had broken in, and that I needs to find them. I left my truck and chased after them, but I obviously ended up empty-handed, as well as a good distance away from my truck that I originally wanted to be in. On my way back from my frivolous pursuit, I thought I heard something whispering all around me. Normally, I would write this off as the wind in the trees, but I actually heard words, as well as my name. My full name. This obviously bothered me, and I spent the rest of the evening inside my truck. There was another time I was doing a patrol while I remained inside of the safety of my truck, while also listening to the radio. I was disoriented with all the mist, and I hadn't realized that I was near the tombstone 666, and my radio went on the fritz. Instead of normally merging two radio stations, I heard something very deep and growled coming from my radio. It told me the exact date I would die in a very demonic voice. This event wasn't nearly as scary, but a part of me is quite curious to see if this would be correct. Granted, this experience was probably someone just fooling around on the radio late at night, but you better believe me when I told you, when I have the exact date written down, just in case.
I was traveling for business. I do it often, and I stay in the same hotel every single time. It's a great little place, perfect for me anyways, and I had to run a few errands before checking in, so I arrived a bit later than normal. It was raining, really hammering down, and I got soaked through as I ran from my car to the lobby. I didn't bring an umbrella or a coat. God. And I was glad that I already grabbed some dinner, so I went straight to the room. I filled the tub up and had a bath and jumped into bed. I was shattered. Thunder and lightning woke me. It was so loud. I rolled over in bed and something caught my eye. I saw a shadow at the window. I wanted to get up and see if someone was there, but I couldn't move. It was like sleep paralysis or something, and whenever lightning flashed, I saw the shadow at the window. I couldn't speak, I couldn't move, all I could do was stare in horror towards the window. Thunder boomed one more time, and suddenly, the shadow was gone, and I was able to move again. I went to the window and there was no one there, and then the lightning had stopped. There was no moonlight, so I couldn't see anything. I got back into bed and went to sleep. I mean, what else could I have done? The next morning at breakfast, I spoke to a hotel employee and told him about what happened. I told him that there was some figure, shadow or silhouette or whatever that was peering at me through the window. The employee asked what room I was staying in, and then when I told him, he said that my story couldn't possibly be true. I asked him what he meant and he said, "There's no corridor where your room's window is. If someone was there, they might have been 10 foot tall." I was dumbstruck and a bit annoyed with his cocky answer, he offered to prove it to me, so off I went to take a look. We used to have stairs there, but they collapsed due to age. They were warded off from the public, and they were so dilapidated that there was a gaping hole in the middle of them. He was right. There was nowhere for anyone to stand near the window. The hotel employee couldn't believe it. He even looked a bit shaken up, and he said no one else had said anything about that room or a shadow peering at them while they slept. Underneath, translated by J. Nightmares. This is a story that I was told by my granddad. He grew up during the war, and back then, many of the houses had these dirt floors out in the countryside. It was pretty normal apparently in Japan. I will try to provide you with word for word of what my grandfather told me. His father was a taxi driver, and his mother died before he was 5 years old. His dad needed to work every hour God sent him just to keep food on the table, and it couldn't have been easy back then. Since he was a taxi driver, he worked a lot of antisocial hours. He would stay with his neighbors while his father was working, and then, when his father finished work, he would come and get him. It became more and more frequent, and his father didn't want to be a bother to his neighbors after they had been so helpful. So sometimes, when he knew that he would be home really late, he would leave my granddad home alone. Of course, this situation wasn't ideal, and my grandfather said that he was very lonely and scared at home alone. He said that he would sit on the floor and cry and call for his father often. The neighbors would hear this, but they couldn't do much as they didn't want to intervene. One night, the neighbor heard my dad's cries stop, and then they heard laughter. They thought to themselves that, hey, that's great, maybe my father is home. But a couple of hours later, they heard my granddad call out to his father as they came through the door. The neighbor thought it was strange because they were convinced that my granddad was talking with someone next door. Over the course of the days and weeks, the neighbors heard my grandpa laughing and talking with someone next door when they knew that his father was out driving his taxi. The neighbor grew concerned and suspicious, so they went to investigate. My grandpa was apparently sat alone in the kitchen, on the dirt floor and in the dark, laughing and speaking with something unseen. They were really worried about him, so they waited with him until his father came home. When his dad came home, he was asked directly about who he had been speaking with every night. My grandpa said in response, "I have been speaking to the mother. I was scared and lonely and crying, so the mother came. She hugs me and rubs my cheeks, and she cares about me." His father then asked about how this mother was getting in and out, and my granddad pointed at the corner of the kitchen. The dirt was disturbed in this area. There was a gap between the bottom of the wooden wall and the dirt floor. Someone could have crawled in and out through that gap. My granddad then said to his father, "She crawls through each night smiling at me." Well, my granddad's father was disturbed by that and covered the gap with boards and asked for a reduction of hours at work while he looked for a new place. Sometimes at night, he said he heard scratching against the boards, but could never find anyone out there when he went to look for the source of the sound.
Encounter with a shadow person. This happened a few years back. There hasn't been much activity in the house since. It was a quiet summer night in about 2015 or 2014. My oldest brother claimed to have encountered this thing before with his girlfriend. It scared them both enough to where they were sitting outside the house too scared to go back inside when I came back from the grocery store. The story goes as follows. In the basement, the only bedroom is set up with a bed facing the doorway. When the door is open, you can see right outside to the living room downstairs. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were lying down on this bed together talking. He was facing the wall and she was facing towards the doorway. She looked up from their conversation to see a little girl watching them from the doorway. She was obviously scared, but not wanting to alarm my brother, she didn't say anything. She looked up again. This time, the girl was next to the bed. She had enough and wanted to get out of that house immediately. I've always looked at this story with skepticism, as I've never really encountered anything paranormal myself. Of course, until it was my turn. Fast forward to 2015 or 2014, when this room was now in possession of a different brother of mine. We're both into art, and I like to hang out in his room because he owns most of the art supplies, and we had turned it into a makeshift art studio when he wasn't sleeping, of course. We had the door open, and the light outside in the living room was turned off. I was sitting on his bed working in a sketchbook when I looked up and see this dark outline of a little girl watching me from the doorway. I didn't feel particularly threatened or in danger, just confused as to what I'm looking at. I know it's a girl because I could see her short hair stopping at the shoulders. She was also wearing a dress, though not long like a gown. She held her arms straight down, though slightly outwards as if she was walking only moments before. The thing that stuck with me was that I couldn't see her face. I was trying to make sense of what was happening, just as my brother gets up in a hurry and closes the door. Then he asks me, "Did you see that too?" To this day, we still talk about what we both saw in that basement. It's been very quiet since. This is an older house built in the 1950s, with many different owners. I couldn't tell you what happened here, as I don't know. Only that visitors often say they feel uneasy here, and that sometimes my dog behaves very strange. Maybe he sees things I can't. I've always been open-minded to the paranormal, but not necessarily religious. I have a deep love for science, but I cannot explain to you what I saw that night. Drizzle taps lightly on the leaves all around us. The smell of pine rich in the air as we crept through the undergrowth, my granddad and I. I run my tongue along my teeth, focusing. I raise the rifle a little higher. A Nosler. A way higher quality weapon than I should be using. The thing is wasted on me. I'm an appalling hunter. I'm not even sure if I agree with it, to be honest. Hunting, I mean. Ethically speaking. I mean, my granddad and I eat basically everything we kill, and to be honest, I don't kill a whole lot. I send many of my shots deliberately wide. I just do this to hang out with him, really. He's a fascinating man, and the guy likes taking me out into the woods, so I just go along with it. It's fine. It's good quality time that I'm lucky to have. But we're stalking a pair of deer right now. Big things are well. I'm pretty sure the creatures know we're here, but you could get surprisingly close provided you didn't actually give off any sign that you were trying to shoot them. "Stay low, Robbie," he murmurs through the side of his mouth. "Move your right hand past the bush, then it's a clean shot. Take it when ready."
I like my name. Named after the man beside me, as it happens, Robert. He being Robert, for me of course, Robert II. I nod and creep into position, taking careful aim as instructed. I see a thumbs up in the corner of my eye, and I shoot. I miss. The sound ricochets around the forest and birds burst from a nearby tree, shooting up towards the sky. The deer wheel around in a panic and make to leave.
God damn it!
My granddad mutters and raises up from behind the bush, bringing his rifle with him and firing off a quick shot. My ego is somewhat relieved by the fact that he misses too, and we both watch as the deer disappear into the undergrowth and shadow of the forest. The man lowers his weapon and looks at me. I did the same and gave him a shrug. We hold eye contact for a second, then he breaks with a chuckle, shaking his head.
Damn it, Robbie. Every time I think I've taught you something, you manage to pull off some magnificent blunder just like that.
Hey, well, you know what they say. You shouldn't judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree.
I ain't judging you or the tree climbing ability. You're my grandson. I'm judging you on your ability to swim, fishy.
I point to the shattered branch my granddad caused when he fired his shot. I truly am learning from the best.
Bastard,
he snorts with a laugh, thumping me on the chest.
Come on, let's track him. Plenty of daylight left.
We push around the brush and head through the little clearing, stepping over the fallen log and making up to follow the route the deer both took. But my granddad suddenly stops and holds up his hand with his head cocked to the side. I pause likewise, waiting, holding my breath and listening intently. My ears hone in on the sound of rustling foliage and snapping twigs. It grows louder, heading towards us in the exact direction the deer were running from.
Jesus,
my granddad grunts.
They're coming back this way. They'll have seen a...
But he is cut off by the sudden emergence of the deer through the bushes ahead, rushing right at us from the green, gloomy shade. Shit! I shout out loud in a panic. The deer make no attempt to run around us in the slightest, and run instead directly towards our position. I raise the rifle and take rapid, shaky aim.
Damn it, Steve, down!
Granddad shouts, grabbing me by the sleeve and hauling me to the forest floor back behind the log. Steve. The air escapes me as I crash with my granddad down to the ground, and the deer jump right over us. My granddad instantly takes position, cocking and aiming his own rifle over the top of the log, deadly focused.
Something must have made him run like that. They have seen a wolf or a bear.
A wolf? A bear?
I'd be surprised to see either at this time of day, but as I said, something made him run.
My granddad remains cool and composed, the barrel of the rifle fixed on the damaged woodland ahead and along the deer's path. I stick close, watching out in all directions in case we are approached from the side, gun cocked and heart pounding. But nothing comes. We wait for a tense laden minute, then another, muscles aching with the stress of simply holding ourselves in preemptive positions, but as I said, nothing else comes towards us. My granddad cautiously gets to his feet.
Weird,
he mutters.
We better move out of here. Come on, stay alert, but let's go.
I nod in reply, and together we make a swift but carefully exit from the little grove, heading back through the woods and retracting our steps. After what I hope is something of a safe distance, I asked my granddad a question. Why did you call me Steve back then?
Huh?
When the deer were coming at me, you called me Steve. You said, Steve, get down.
Huh, is that so?
My granddad asks, scratching his chin.
I don't know. You know Steve, though, right? Old friend of mine. I swear I've mentioned him before.
I consider. Yeah, maybe once or twice. My granddad shakes his head.
I've definitely talked about him more than that. You probably weren't listening. He sighs. It was just the moment, I suppose. The way you were standing, the deer coming right at you, raising your gun. What would have happened to you if you shot one, eh? It would have gone right down and knocked you out with it.
I don't know. It wasn't all that big.
It was bigger than you're giving it credit for, and at that speed, would have flattened you. It's what I told Steve all those years ago. He did the exact same thing, the idiot.
What's he up to these days?
My granddad does not reply. He only looks out into the depths of the forest. We're atop a high hill, and the trees give way to a view across the deep green valley. The sky is gray overhead. The man tuts and shakes his head.
Steve? Steve isn't around much anymore.
Oh, sorry. He's not dead, is he? My granddad grimaces.
I don't know exactly.
You don't know?
Look, just drop it, kid. A story for another day. Let's just get back to the campsite, cook that rabbit we caught earlier.
He pauses, putting out a hand, and I stop at once, following his line of sight. I hadn't even spotted it, but it chills my blood to see it now. Gives me the shivers even remembering. We stand only a few feet away from a deer. It's one of the same deer as before, I'm sure of it. Neither of us had spotted it because the thing is standing entirely still, like a statue, a taxidermy almost.
The hell?
Granddad whispers, staring at the creature in surprise. He squints and then leans over to me.
It's breathing, though only barely. Look down there at its chest.
I do so, taking the spectacle in. The deer has one hoofed foot placed against the trunk of a tree, which in itself is quite curious already, but the animal does not move even slightly. It does not blink.
Hey!
My granddad barks, then louder.
Hey!
He claps his hands, but the deer does not react. Then, in time with the sudden flurry of water from the rain-soaked leaves above us, the deer slowly turns its head, all the way around until it is staring at my granddad and myself, one eye on each. My stomach drops, though I am unsure as to why. The deer is... I don't know. Something is wrong.
This thing must be sick,
my granddad murmurs.
We'll take a different route back, go wide of this creature. We're too close to it as it is.
Yeah, I mumble. The two of us edge away and through the undergrowth, taking a new direction as the deer watches us go, deadly silent. I shiver as it at last passes out of sight, lost behind us to the watery green shadows of the forest. Later that night, after returning to camp and preparing and eating our catch, I bid my granddad good night and crawl into my tent, zipping the flaps up after me. I fumble around in the near darkness for a while, my lamp casting intense black shadows out in all directions, as I shift it from place to place, trying to work my way into my sleeping bag. It doesn't feel particularly cold at the moment, but the temperature has the potential to suddenly drop at any given minute, and I don't want to wake up frozen solid at 3 a.m. As it happens, I don't. I awaken at 3:15, not frozen but slick with sweat, roused from a dreamless slumber. My ears prick up at the sound of rustling and snuffling outside, right by my tent. I hold my breath and grit my teeth. It's this fear of the unknown that gets me. It's probably just a rabbit or a hare, but the possibility that it could be something larger, something more dangerous, is impossible to ignore. For some reason, my mind does not go to an image of a bear or a mountain lion or anything like that. It goes to the deer, frozen in place, eyes unblinking, head turning as it watches my granddad and I pass by. Something presses up against the tent right by my head. I wince and stare at the bulging material through the darkness. I try not to think about the fact that I am separated by the beasts of the forest by a pair of what are effectively thin, flimsy sheets of fabric. Just ignore it, I tell myself. Ignore it and it'll go away. I quietly roll over and scrunch up my eyes, determined to be a man and not get all frightened by the presence of some raccoon or squirrel. The creature sniffles some more, rustling about in the grass in the dark. My heart rate increases as I hear the thing pawing against the tent's outer lining. And then for a second, it stops entirely, and to my horror, I hear my granddad's voice.
It's breathing, though only barely.
The sentence comes crisp and sharp through the general murmur and backing breeze of the forest. The sentence is entirely devoid of cadence, as if read from a book by someone who had never known English.
Look down there at its chest,
says the voice.
Fuck.
Panting now, I do not know what I am supposed to do. It's my granddad outside playing a prank on me. It has to be. It must be, because there is literally no other explanation that makes sense. Regardless of the fact that I had never heard the man speak in such a way, even in humor, in his entire life. He must be sleepwalking. That's it. My explosive heart rate cools just a bit. That's it. It's the only possible explanation that makes sense. Then if that's the case, then I can't just leave him to wander around outside. Despite my fear, I gently ease my way out of my sleeping bag. You might think me an idiot, but if my granddad is wandering around in the woods in a daze, he could get lost or seriously hurt. So I push aside my irrational terror, and with a shaking hand I reach for the zip, pulling it open with a noise that is far too loud for comfort. F it. In for a penny, in for a pound. I yank the zip open, and then the next, and push my head out into the night, the cool air washing across my face as I raise the lantern to cast away the darkness. What I see is nothing. I jump outside the tent, staring, lifting the lantern as the light falls across the long grasses of the nearby trees. We're still on the ridge of the valley, but the valley itself is shrouded in darkness. A small section of visible moon illuminates the very tips of the trees in silver, but I am too preoccupied to properly appreciate the natural beauty for now. I pace around the tent in a circle and see no evidence of my grandfather. Granddad? I hiss out into the night, turning and raising the lantern up high. Still nothing. Something chirps softly from between the branches of the deep woods. I turn to face it with throat dry, but the trees give away no secrets. I cross the grass and crouch down by my granddad's tent. The zip remained closed. Granddad? I whisper to no response. I try again, a little louder. Granddad. I hear a groan and a grumble from inside.
Huh?
I hear him mutter, then,
The hell?
Granddad, are you good?
Of course I'm good. What is the matter with you?
All right, nothing. See you tomorrow. He murmurs something under his breath, and I hear the rustle of his sleeping bag as he rolls over. I stand up straight and stare out into the night. For a second time, that chirping sound rings out from the branches, and I make a hasty return to my tent, zipping the thing up tight and secure, shivering as I try to force myself back to sleep. It takes a long time, and I do not recall drifting off. My dreams are disturbing, and are largely comprised of the discovery that something crept into my tent, dream distorted and warped into an impossible size. My dream self scrambles around from place to place, as a nightmare slithers and swims through the shadows like water. It is a welcome relief when I awake safe and sound, to the faded glare of tent-filtering morning sunlight shining into my face. I mutter, sitting up straight and groggily rubbing my eyes. For a second or two, the reality of last night blurs into the dreams, but as I remember the truth, that bitterly familiar anxiety settles back in. I clamber out of the tent into the warming morning air to find my granddad washing his face in a pot of water.
"Morning," he grunts. "How do you feel this morning?"
"Not great, to be honest," I reply. "You were sleepwalking last night."
"Huh?"
Granddad glances up at me but continues with his routine.
"No, I don't sleepwalk."
"You were mumbling nonsense and bashing into my tent like at 3 a.m., I tell him. "I came to check on you, but you must have just gotten back to bed." My granddad pauses and looks right at me.
"So that did happen then, you disturbing me. Thought I might have dreamt it."
He stands up and scratches his jaw.
"Tell me exactly what happened."
I relay the story, and my granddad remains silent until the end. Slightly paled, he looks around at our surroundings and down into the valley.
"I frickin' knew it,"
he mutters, almost imperceptibly.
"It's the same place. The exact same place."
"What?" I ask him. "What do you mean?"
"I came here with Steve once. I knew I'd been here before. I thought I'd picked the location pretty randomly, but I guess my subconscious had other ideas."
"Granddad, I don't know what the hell you're talking about." He stares out over the valley and I follow his gaze. We watch as a small flock of dark birds fluttering around in a circle above the trees. Again and again and again. Around and around they go. He turns to look straight at me, his expression grim, perhaps even afraid a little, and this unsettles me deeply. Nothing is supposed to scare that man.
"Pack up, Robbie. Make it good and be quick. We're out of here."
In another atmosphere, I may have questioned him, but the vibe is clear. I do as he says at once, and in silence, we quickly pack our own gear, loading up our backpacks with constant furtive glances to the trees. The forest had dried somewhat since yesterday's rain, but the sky overhead is still a swirl of gray. We sit out beneath its gloom, all trace of our modest campsite thoroughly erased. My granddad's pace is a little faster than normal. Bracken and pine needles are crunched underfoot as he strides through the woodlands. He clenches his rifle a little tighter, too. I break the tension. "Granddad, what the hell is going on? What aren't you telling me?"
"I was an idiot once before,"
Granddad replies, as a breeze whistles its way through the boughs of the trees.
"And I lost a good friend. I won't let the same thing happen to you."
We push through the bushes and pass by a large pond surrounded by thick, tangled weeds. I glance over to the water. The water is a grim gray-green and covered in a curious floating moss. The surface is broken by the heads of 3 deer, standing perfectly still. The entirety of their bodies below the necks are submerged, and they stare at us as we pass by them. On another day, I might have found the sight quite comical, but right now I feel nothing but cold, bitter fear. One of the deer rises up from the water, rippling it quietly, rearing up onto its hind legs, and my granddad grabs my sleeve and hauls me along.
"Don't stop moving. We're getting out of here. Just keep moving, Robbie."
Our steps become fast, our breathing a little more labored. The trees rush by, branches scratch at my arms and my face. We push out into a clearing, and my granddad skids to an immediate halt. "What is it?" I ask, panting. Something moves in the shadows of the trees, shifting between the branches and the clearing's opposite side. The hair at the back of my neck bristles, and I instinctively raise the rifle. The sounds of the birds and the breeze fade away, and the air itself seems to darken as the shifting shadow ahead draws closer. It is difficult,
near impossible to make out its exact shape through the layers of branch and foliage. But I swear, I could see a rough, vaguely humanoid silhouette amongst the shadows and the dark green blown blur. "Did you come back for me, Robert?" whispers a voice. My muscles tense up in reaction to my name. It is my name it speaks, or my granddad's. My granddad sucks some air in through his teeth. He begins to carefully sidestep his way around the clearing, and I copy his movements. "You wouldn't leave me behind again, would you?" The voice is not dissimilar to the one I heard last night. It is different, sure, but the cadence, or lack thereof, is much the same. My granddad raises the rifle, cocks it, but he does not fire. "Keep going around, kid," he says to me. "To the left. Pass through that part of the clearing there. I'll be right behind you." I start to edge my way around the clearing, never taking my eye off the shadow and the trees just ahead. I'm trying so hard to focus on it, to understand what it is that I am seeing, but I can't. The very branches themselves seem to be moving, cracking and rippling in the shade. The figure takes a sudden step forward. "Run!" my granddad shouts, raising the rifle and firing a loud shot up into the air. Unprepared for such a sudden noise, my ears ring as I scramble and stumble through the forest along a natural path of sorts between the trees, though I stumble to a halt when I realize my granddad is not behind me. He told me to run, but do I go back for him? I have to. It's a no-brainer. So I swivel around and prepare to charge back to the clearing when the man himself staggers out through the bushes towards me, face white as a sheet. "Get that damn thing out of my face, you idiot!" He grunts as he shoves away the barrel of my rifle, and together we race through the forest. My granddad dumps his backpack and I do likewise, leaving the equipment behind as we tear through the undergrowth, way back to where we parked the truck the other day. When at last we see it, waiting for us at the edge of the dirt track road, we throw ourselves inside, and my granddad stuffs in the key and turns it with a clank. The engine revs into life. The wheels spin and away we go. Back through the wilds, down the long roads of the woodlands. I summon the courage after a while, and once the air has cooled, I ask my granddad what he saw, what happened after he fired the rifle. "Thing tried to speak to me again. The deep woods, Robbie. I'm sorry for taking you there. They can screw with a man's mind, those places. Real bad." There was something there, though, wasn't there? Something real.
"Yes, I think so."
Was it? I falter. Who was it, Granddad?
"A nightmare, that's all. Something that shouldn't exist, by all laws of nature."
Its voice. Do you recognize the voice?
"You said you heard someone outside your tent last night, right?"
I nod.
"It sounded like me?"
"Yeah," I reply.
"But it wasn't me, was it?"
"No," I reply. "No, it wasn't."
"Sometimes we hear voices. Don't mean they belong to anyone."
"So why didn't you shoot it?"
"What?"
His hands flex and clench around the wheel. "You fired the rifle, but you aimed it up into the air, not at the shadow. Why did you do that?" To this, my granddad had no answer. He only reacts briefly across to pat my shoulder. And as the clouds swirl overhead, we spent the rest of the long drive home in a contemplative silence. Silence, with the occasional glance to the thickets of trees that pass us by.